Introduction. Mia sat in the mahogany-paneled boardroom, her termination letter crisp between her fingers. Too aggressive, the HR director had said. Intimidating to colleagues. Not a cultural fit. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd just closed the biggest deal in the company's history, bringing in $50 million in revenue. But her direct communication style, her refusal to soften her edges with apologetic smiles, and her unwillingness to defer to less competent male colleagues had sealed her fate. 3 years later, Mia stood before a packed auditorium of entrepreneurs, announcing her company's acquisition of her former employer. The same intensity that had gotten her fired, her fierce intuition, her uncompromising standards, her ability to see through corporate facades, had become the foundation of her empire. She hadn't learned to be nicer. She'd learned to weaponize what they called her darkness. "They told me I was too much," she said to thunderous applause. "I decided to become everything they feared." This transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because Mia discovered what millions of women have forgotten, that the very traits society labels as dark, aggressive, or inappropriate in women are often our greatest sources of power. The rage they want us to suppress? It's fuel for revolutionary change. The intuition they call emotional? It's strategic intelligence that cuts through deception. The intensity they find uncomfortable? It's magnetic presence that commands rooms. The purpose of this book. This book exists to guide you through the same alchemical process that transformed Mia and countless other women from suppressed shadows of themselves into forces of nature. But this isn't about adopting masculine strategies or playing by rules designed to diminish you. This is about reclaiming the sacred feminine power that has been systematically trained out of you since childhood. For too long, women have been told that to succeed, we must be palatable, agreeable, nice. We've been conditioned to apologize for our intensity, dim our intuitive gifts, and package our authentic selves in non-threatening wrapping. We've learned to fear our own anger, doubt our instincts, and shrink our presence to make others comfortable. This conditioning isn't accidental, it's strategic. A woman who owns her full power, who trusts her rage as sacred information and her intuition as divine guidance, who refuses to apologize for taking up space, is a threat to systems built on her compliance. The purpose of this book is to help you become that threat. Through the ancient art of shadow alchemy, transforming what has been rejected into what empowers, you'll learn to see your suppressed aspects not as flaws to fix, but as diamonds in the rough. Your anger isn't something to manage, it's energy to harness. Your intensity isn't something to tone down, it's presence to amplify. Your refusal to conform isn't rebellion, it's integrity. WHO This book is for. This book is for the woman who has been told she's too much, and is tired of trying to be less. It's for the executive who's been passed over for promotions because she doesn't play politics well enough, meaning she won't smile while being undermined. It's for the entrepreneur whose direct communication style is labeled abrasive, while her male counterparts are called decisive. It's for the mother whose fierce protection of her children is deemed controlling, and the daughter whose refusal to be diminished is called difficult. You're reading this because somewhere deep inside, you know you're operating at a fraction of your true power. You've spent years trying to fit into boxes that were never designed for your dimensions. You've apologized for your intensity, second-guessed your intuition, and dimmed your light to avoid making others uncomfortable. You've been told that success requires you to be strategic, calculating, and emotionally controlled, essentially to embody masculine energy while suppressing your feminine gifts. You're done with that. You want to reclaim the parts of yourself that have been driven underground. You're ready to transform the shame you've carried about your anger, your standards, your refusal to settle into strength. You want to master your emotional intensity, not by suppressing it, but by wielding it as the powerful tool it was meant to be. You're ready to develop the kind of magnetic presence that doesn't need to demand respect. It commands it naturally. This book is for women who are ready to stop asking permission to be powerful and start taking responsibility for the impact of their full presence. It's for those who understand that true leadership doesn't come from copying masculine models, but from embodying authentic feminine power without apology. If you've ever felt like you're living as a shadow of your true self, if you've ever sensed that your greatest perceived weaknesses might actually be your superpowers in disguise, if you're ready to stop playing small in a world that needs your full magnitude, this book is your roadmap home to yourself. Why this book is different. Unlike other empowerment books that teach women to succeed by adopting masculine strategies or softening their edges to be more likable, this book takes a radically different approach. It's built on the revolutionary premise that your power lies not in becoming more palatable, but in alchemizing what makes you unpalatable into your greatest strengths. Most personal development approaches for women fall into two camps. Either they teach you to lean in using traditionally masculine approaches, or they focus on healing and softening without providing practical strategies for wielding power in the real world. This book synthesizes opposing viewpoints to create a third path, one that honors both your fierce and flowing aspects while giving you concrete tools to transform shadow into strength. The methodology here is unique because it's based on shadow alchemy rather than shadow healing. Instead of trying to integrate your darkness by making it lighter, you'll learn to transmute its raw power into conscious leadership. Your anger becomes strategic fuel. Your intensity becomes magnetic presence. Your refusal to conform becomes authentic authority. Every principle in this book is illustrated through real case studies of women who have successfully made this transformation. You'll see how Mia, a tech CEO, turned her reputation for being ruthless into a competitive advantage that allowed her to build the most innovative company in her industry. You'll learn from Mia, a spiritual teacher whose embrace of her dark goddess energy attracted a devoted following of women ready for uncompromising truth. These aren't theoretical concepts. They're proven strategies that work in boardrooms, entrepreneurial ventures, creative pursuits, and personal relationships. The book also addresses what others won't, the real costs of feminine conditioning and the practical challenges of deprogramming years of nice girl training. It doesn't promise that embracing your full power will be comfortable or that everyone will celebrate your transformation. Instead, it prepares you for the reality of what it means to stop conforming and gives you the tools to thrive regardless of others' reactions. Most importantly, this isn't about becoming harder or more masculine. It's about accessing the full spectrum of feminine power, including the aspects that have been demonized and suppressed. It's about understanding that the sacred feminine includes both the nurturing mother and the fierce protector, both the flowing river and the devastating storm. What to expect? This book will take you on a journey through the landscape of suppressed feminine power, showing you how to reclaim territory that was never meant to be abandoned. You'll discover that what you've been taught to see as your greatest liabilities are actually your most potent assets, waiting to be properly understood and skillfully wielded. We'll begin by examining the historical and cultural forces that systematically dismantled feminine power structures, replacing goddess-centered societies with systems that required women's compliance and self-suppression. You'll understand how the witch trials weren't just historical events, they were psychological programming that still runs in your nervous system today, making you fear your own power and intuitive gifts. Through detailed case studies, you'll witness the transformation of women who refuse to stay small. You'll see how Mia turned her intimidating presence into a leadership style that inspired fierce loyalty, and how Mia transformed her excessive emotional intensity into the empathic intelligence that made her an unparalleled negotiator. These stories aren't inspiration. They're strategic blueprints showing exactly how shadow aspects become superpowers. The practical heart of the book focuses on rage alchemy, the art of transforming anger from a destructive force into creative fuel. You'll learn specific techniques for harvesting the energy of your anger without being consumed by it, and discover how your fury at injustice is actually your inner revolutionary, calling you to create change. This isn't about managing your anger. It's about partnering with it as a source of clarity and power. You'll master your intuitive gifts without apology, learning to trust your inner knowing even when it contradicts conventional wisdom. Through exercises and real-world applications, you'll develop the ability to read energy, detect deception, and access information that isn't available through logical analysis alone. You'll understand why your emotional intensity isn't a weakness to overcome, but a guidance system to honor. The book will teach you to cultivate magnetic presence, the kind of authentic authority that doesn't need to prove itself because it simply is. You'll learn the difference between power that dominates and power that magnetizes, discovering how to command respect without demanding it, and how to take up space without apology. Integration practices throughout ensure that these aren't just concepts you understand intellectually, but embodied realities that transform how you move through the world. You'll learn to sustain your empowerment without burning out, maintain your boundaries without building walls, and lead from authentic power without losing your capacity for connection. By the end of this journey, you won't just understand your power, you'll be living it. You'll have transformed shame into strength, intensity into influence, and suppression into sacred rebellion. Call to action. What you're about to read will challenge everything you've been taught about what it means to be an appropriate, acceptable woman. You'll be asked to question the very foundations of feminine conditioning and consider the possibility that your greatest perceived flaws are actually your dormant superpowers. This isn't a comfortable journey. Reclaiming suppressed power never is. You'll face the parts of yourself you've been taught to hide, and you'll discover that they're not monsters to be tamed, but allies to be embraced. You'll confront the ways you've been complicit in your own diminishment, and you'll find the courage to stop apologizing for your magnitude. Some people in your life won't celebrate this transformation. Those who have benefited from your self-suppression may resist your expansion. Systems built on your compliance will push back against your authenticity. This book will prepare you for these challenges and give you the tools to navigate them with grace and strength. But here's what's waiting on the other side: the version of yourself you've always known was possible but never dared to become. The woman who walks into rooms and shifts the energy simply by being present. Who trusts her instincts implicitly and acts on them without apology. Who uses her anger as fuel for creating the changes she wants to see in the world. Who embodies such authentic power that respect isn't something she has to earn, it's something she naturally commands. The world needs this version of you. Not the diminished, apologetic, carefully contained version you've been trained to be, but the full-spectrum, unapologetically powerful, magnificently intense woman you actually are. Are you ready to stop being afraid of your own power and start wielding it consciously? Are you ready to transform what they called your darkness into your greatest light? Are you ready to step into the fullness of who you were born to be? Then turn the page, and let's begin the alchemy. 1. The Theft of Thunder: How Sacred Rage Became Hysteria. When Wisdom Became Witchcraft. The systematic rebranding of feminine power from sacred wisdom to dangerous pathology represents one of history's most successful propaganda campaigns, transforming women who once commanded respect as healers and seers into cautionary tales of emotional instability. This deliberate shift didn't happen overnight, nor was it accidental. It served specific purposes for emerging power structures that required feminine submission to maintain control. Medieval wise women held positions of authority through their emotional intelligence, intuitive abilities, and fierce protection of their communities. These women were the village's first responders during crises, making life or death decisions that required both deep wisdom and unwavering courage. They understood that true leadership often meant standing alone against popular opinion when community well-being was at stake. The healer knew when to be gentle and when to be firm. She understood that sometimes saving a life meant causing temporary pain, and she never apologized for this necessary harshness. Her emotional range wasn't seen as instability. It was recognized as the full spectrum of human response required for effective leadership. The Great Reframe. The transition from reverence to ridicule coincided with the rise of patriarchal institutions that required feminine submission to maintain power structures. What had once been celebrated as divine feminine wisdom became reframed as hysteria, witchcraft, and emotional dysfunction. This wasn't merely cultural evolution, it was calculated repositioning. Consider the traits that made medieval wise women powerful. Fierce boundary enforcement, they refused to compromise on matters of life and death. Emotional authenticity, they expressed the full range of human feeling without shame. Intuitive decision-making, they trusted their inner knowing over external pressure. Protective rage, they became formidable when their community was threatened. Unwavering truth-telling, they spoke difficult truths regardless of social comfort. These exact same qualities now earn modern women labels like difficult, aggressive, hysterical, or unprofessional. The behaviors haven't changed, only the interpretation. The medieval standard-bearer. In 12th century England, Natalie served as her village's wise woman during one of the most challenging periods in medieval history. When plague swept through surrounding areas, she made the unpopular decision to quarantine the village, refusing entry to desperate refugees despite intense community pressure. Her fierce advocacy for vulnerable residents meant standing up to corrupt local officials who tried to exploit the crisis for personal gain. Natalie displayed what we would now call emotional intensity in her leadership. She wept openly when community members died, raged against injustice, and celebrated victories with unbridled joy. Her emotional authenticity wasn't seen as weakness. It was proof of her deep connection to the community's well-being. When she spoke truth to power, even when that truth was uncomfortable, people listened because they trusted her motivation. The medieval Natalie was indispensable precisely because she refused to compromise her values for social comfort. Her unwillingness to bow to corrupt officials protected her community from exploitation. Her emotional range allowed her to respond appropriately to different crises. Her fierce protection of the vulnerable made her a respected leader rather than a problematic subordinate. The modern translation. Fast forward to today, Natalie, a corporate executive, displays identical traits. She passionately advocates for her team's well-being, refuses to compromise her values when pressured by unethical leadership, and brings emotional intensity to her work that reflects her deep investment in outcomes. She speaks up against policies that harm employees, even when silence would be politically safer. Yet while the medieval Natalie was revered for these qualities, the modern Natalie is sent to anger management courses. She's labeled too aggressive for the same behaviors that would make Evan a celebrated, visionary leader. Her emotional authenticity is pathologized as unprofessional, while his identical passion is praised as executive presence. This isn't coincidence. It's the continuation of a centuries-old campaign to neutralize feminine power. The diagnostic trap. Modern psychology has created an entire vocabulary for pathologizing feminine strength. Terms like borderline personality disorder, histrionic, and emotionally dysregulated are disproportionately applied to women displaying the same intensity that built civilizations when it was channeled through feminine leadership roles. The wise woman's emotional range has become mood swings. Her fierce protection has become aggressive behavior. Her intuitive knowing has become irrational decision-making. Her refusal to compromise core values has become inflexibility. These aren't clinical observations, they're cultural judgments disguised as medical diagnoses. Reclaiming the archetype. The modern difficult women exhibit the same qualities that once made women spiritual leaders and community anchors. They possess unwillingness to compromise their truth when pressured by authority figures who prioritize control over well-being. They enforce boundaries fiercely because they understand that weak boundaries lead to exploitation and harm. They express emotions authentically because they recognize that emotional suppression creates disconnection from inner wisdom. These women aren't broken versions of feminine niceness, they're intact versions of feminine power that refuse to be diminished by social conditioning. They carry the same energy that medieval wise women channeled, but without the cultural framework that once honored this expression. Understanding this historical context changes everything. When you recognize that your difficult traits are actually ancient feminine strengths, you stop trying to fix yourself and start reclaiming your birthright. The path forward isn't about becoming more palatable to systems designed to diminish you. It's about recognizing that your intensity, your boundaries, your emotional authenticity, and your fierce protection of what matters aren't character flaws requiring management. They're expressions of sacred feminine power seeking proper channels. In our next exploration, we'll examine how the pressure to be nice has created a prison that keeps this power locked away, and why politeness has become the enemy of authentic feminine expression. When ambition becomes pathology. The medical and psychological establishments have systematically pathologized feminine expressions of power, creating diagnostic categories that transform natural leadership traits into symptoms requiring treatment when displayed by women. This isn't accidental oversight, it's the clinical arm of the same campaign that once burned wise women at the stake, now wielding prescription pads instead of torches. The transformation of feminine strength into mental illness represents perhaps the most insidious aspect of patriarchal control, because it operates under the guise of helping women. When a woman displays the same intensity that makes men visionary leaders, she's offered medication instead of recognition. When she shows the fierce protection that once made her a respected community anchor, she's diagnosed instead of celebrated. The double standard diagnosis. Assertiveness in women becomes aggression disorder, while the same behavior in men is called executive presence. This isn't subtle bias, it's systematic reframing that serves specific power structures. Consider how identical behaviors receive completely different interpretations based solely on the gender of the person expressing them. When a woman stands firm on her boundaries, she's difficult or inflexible. When a man does the same, he's principled and strong-willed. When she expresses passion about her work, she's too emotional or unstable. When he shows identical intensity, he's driven and committed to excellence. The psychological establishment has created an entire vocabulary for pathologizing traits that would be celebrated in men. Direct communication becomes aggressive behavior disorder. High standards become perfectionism, requiring therapy. Emotional authenticity becomes emotional dysregulation. Protective instincts become control issues. Visionary thinking becomes grandiose delusions. These aren't clinical observations, they're cultural judgments dressed up in medical terminology. The passion pathology. Emotional intensity and passion are reframed as mood disorders rather than recognized as indicators of deep caring and authentic engagement. Women who feel deeply, care intensely, and express their full range of emotions are told they need stabilization instead of being honored for their capacity to experience life fully. This pathologizing of passion serves a clear purpose. It keeps women's power contained within medical frameworks that require professional management. Instead of learning to channel their intensity into leadership and creation, women are taught to suppress it through medication and therapy designed to make them more stable, which often means more compliant. The irony is devastating. The same emotional range that allows women to be extraordinary mothers, leaders, healers, and innovators is systematically labeled as dysfunction when it becomes inconvenient for existing power structures. The intuition insult. Intuitive decision-making gets dismissed as impulsivity, instead of being valued as rapid pattern recognition and holistic thinking. Women who make quick decisions based on their ability to synthesize complex information intuitively are told they're acting rashly, while men who make identical snap judgments are praised for their decisive leadership. This represents a fundamental misunderstanding, or deliberate misrepresentation, of how intuitive intelligence works. When a woman with years of experience makes a rapid decision based on pattern recognition that her conscious mind hasn't yet articulated, she's not being impulsive. She's accessing a form of intelligence that synthesizes vast amounts of information instantly. Yet because this process doesn't follow linear, externally verifiable steps, it gets pathologized as poor impulse control rather than recognized as sophisticated cognitive processing. The visionary versus the patient. Sophia built a multi-million-dollar company through her intense passion, unwavering vision, and fierce protection of her team. She worked 18-hour days during critical growth phases, displayed explosive enthusiasm for breakthrough innovations, and refused to compromise her values even when investors pressured her to cut corners that would harm employees. Her emotional range was vast and authentic. She celebrated victories with unbridled joy, grieved setbacks with genuine sorrow, and expressed fierce anger when competitors tried to poach her team with unethical tactics. Her intensity was the fuel that drove innovation and inspired loyalty among employees who felt genuinely protected and valued. When she sought therapy for work-related stress, the natural result of building something from nothing while navigating hostile industry dynamics, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and prescribed mood stabilizers. Her passion became mania, her grief became depression, and her protective anger became emotional dysregulation. Meanwhile, David, her male competitor, displayed identical behaviors. He worked the same crushing hours, showed the same explosive enthusiasm for projects, maintained the same intense focus, and demonstrated identical fierce competitive drive when rivals threatened his business. His emotional intensity matched hers perfectly, the exuberant highs of breakthrough moments and the devastating lows of major setbacks. Yet David was featured on magazine covers as an innovative disruptor. His intensity was reframed as visionary leadership. His long hours became evidence of dedication. His emotional peaks and valleys became proof of his passionate commitment to excellence. The same traits that made him a business icon made her a patient. The treatment trap. The psychological establishment offers women two primary options when they display natural leadership intensity: suppress it through medication or manage it through therapy designed to make them more socially acceptable. Neither option involves honoring the power or learning to channel it more effectively. This creates a devastating choice. Women can either dim their light to fit social expectations or be labeled as mentally ill for expressing their full capacity. There's no mainstream framework that says, your intensity is appropriate for the magnitude of what you're creating. Let's help you channel it more effectively. The cost of compliance. When women accept these diagnoses and treatments, they often lose access to the very qualities that made them powerful in the first place. The mood stabilizers that eliminate her inappropriate emotional range also eliminate her capacity for the peaks of inspiration that drive innovation. The therapy that teaches her to be more reasonable also teaches her to doubt her intuitive knowing. She becomes easier to manage, but less capable of the breakthrough thinking and fierce protection that once made her formidable. The treatment succeeds in making her more socially acceptable while gutting her power. This systematic pathologizing of feminine strength ensures that women's natural leadership capacities are channeled into medical management rather than world-changing creation. It's the modern version of the same impulse that once labeled powerful women as witches. Now we just call them patients instead. Understanding this framework is the first step toward reclaiming your power from systems designed to contain it. Breaking free from cultural masks. Society employs sophisticated conditioning mechanisms to ensure women suppress their natural power, using shame, social ostracism, and economic punishment to enforce compliance with diminished versions of themselves. These aren't random cultural quirks. They're systematic training programs designed to keep feminine power contained within acceptable boundaries that don't threaten existing hierarchies. The conditioning begins early and operates through multiple channels simultaneously. Family dynamics, educational systems, media messaging, and professional environments all work together to create a seamless web of expectations that teach women their natural expressions of power are inappropriate, unwelcome, or dangerous. Understanding these mechanisms is crucial because most women don't realize they're performing learned behaviors rather than expressing their authentic selves. They believe the diminished version they've been trained to present is who